My name is Veronica Barella. I'm the director of Denver Metro Fair Housing Center, and I want to welcome you to our second panel today. I also want to thank the members of the Conference Planning Committee. Nikki Wright with U.S. Bank, Don Howard with the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, Jesus, it's the first time I ever said that. Jesus Alta Marino, Denver Metro Fair Housing Board member, Tatum Verburgi, student intern in the Masters of Social Work program at MSU. I'd like to introduce, before I do that, I think we have a little bit of extra time. I really want to tell you who our sponsors were for this event, because this is the second year we've done this. This is the second year they've sponsored, and I think it's important. We have the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, the MSU Student Government, First Bank, Alvarado Restaurant Nation, Butler Snow, the Colorado Association of Realtors, MSU Political Science Department, Mission Yogurt, NewSed Community Development Corporation, the South Metro Denver Realtors Association, U.S. Bank, Northeast Denver Housing, Del Norte, and Sewell Halfling Consulting Firm. So I'd really like to give them a round of applause. Without them, we couldn't do this. We have a great panel today. We have Kevin Patterson, the community organizer with the Redress Movement community organizer, Nate Cassie, the community organizer of the East Colfax Community Collective. I'll try to stay over here a little more. Virginia Ortiz, consultant with the Native American Housing Council. Virginia and I worked together when I was with NewSed. I've retired from NewSed, but Virginia and I worked together there for 14 years. I worked there for 40 when I retired, but she was there for a while. The Honorable Flor Alvarez, Denver City Councilwoman. The Honorable Denver City Councilwoman. I always forget honorable. So, we've got some questions for you today. The theme is gentrification. And so what I wanted to do was read the Center for Disease Control's definition and the effects, it's geared towards health effects of gentrification. They define it as displacement of long-term residents. Displacement is one of the biggest cons of gentrification. Loss of affordable housing, increased cost of living, socioeconomic disparities, cultural erosion, loss of small business, reduced diversity, and disruption of the social networks. I thought that was the best definition of all the ones that I pulled up. And so I wanted to share that with you. As Colorado's lack of housing supply drives up rents and home prices, Denver has seen gentrification of neighborhoods resulting in displacement of lower income people of color and by more affluent white residents. The two dramatic results, if you live in Denver and you know this, is the north side, the Highlands. The first neighborhood that was really gentrified in Denver was Curtis Park, and now the Five Points area. The neighborhood I live in, Barnum and Westwood, some of those neighborhoods over in the southeast Denver, some of them are starting to see gentrification, those more close to Colfax. And I'm hoping that, we can do something about it, both as residents and both as the city. And I think one of the ways to do this that the panel will probably reflect on is to regulate the construction of new buildings, preserve existing housing, and protect small ethnic businesses in neighborhoods. And, they can answer the question about how could that happen. That has to happen through the public sector. and it has to happen through neighborhood organizations and residents that live there. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm glad that we're going to have a discussion around it today. So your first question is, what's working well in your community? What is your organization doing to address gentrification and open up new housing options for your community?
Thank you, Veronica. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to all of you today. As a Denver City Council, I'm a newly elected Denver City Council person. I've been in office 9 months, and my district is cut in half by a highway, which is pretty much redlining, and the redlining goes along the highway and along the Platte River. And when I think about gentrification, I see places in Denver like the North Side or Barnum where it's happening more rapidly than in my district, but it's coming. And some of the things that we're doing to increase housing supply is really thinking about what kind of housing can we bring to the district, what kind of supportive services also can we bring to the district. Some of the projects that we have going right now, Warren Village is expanding to the west side of Denver, which really supports single parent families. And we also have the Women's Bean Project, which supports women, formerly incarcerated, formerly unhoused women get back on their feet. We also have, that's also bringing childcare into the district, which is also super important. So when I look at the gentrification, I think we have to be really intentional with the developments that come and having those conversations. Just yesterday, we found out about a new development happening. A lot of the neighbors are upset, and I think something important to know is we can't just stop building housing. That's not the answer. And with that fear and trauma of gentrification, that's part of the reaction. So really working with community to talk about what kind of developments do we want to see and building relationship with developers instead of making them the enemy, to help advocate for the types of housing and services that our neighborhood needs. Another thing about redlined neighborhoods is the social determinants of health. So the social determinants of health in this area are missing. So we don't just need housing, we also need grocery stores, we also need health clinics and other things of that nature. A big part of this conversation will be led by a planning process that will be starting. It's an 18-month process, which will talk about zoning and needs for the neighborhood. So there's a lot I could say on the topic, but those are just some of the things that we're working on in District 7.
Thank you. My name's Nate. I'm an organizer with the East Colfax Community Collective. Fighting gentrification is really hard. So in our community in East Colfax, the East Colfax neighborhood proper, it's a neighborhood in Denver, but we also work in Aurora, Northwest Aurora, in the East Colfax corridor. We are fighting against gentrification on the side of the renters, small businesses, and then homeowners. I mostly work with renters, so I'll speak to that a little bit. But some of the things that we're doing, well, one, we're an organization that believes in a mass movement and people that are in the neighborhood, people who are directly impacted should be leading the work. So a lot of our work is community building. So we have community events like our monthly Renters Legal Clinic, and we also organize tenants at their respective properties when they are facing landlord violations. So one thing that we did, there was a series of condos, about I think 22 luxury condos that were slated to be built, that were in the Aurora Planning Commission, and that was along Yosemite. And if you know Yosemite, Yosemite is the border between Aurora and Denver. And those were 22 luxury condos slated to be built, and those go for about $600,000. So one thing that we did, and we're a new organization, we were founded in 2019, but what we're doing is building the framework and the ground for people in the community, people in the neighborhood, to actually have their voices heard in the planning process. And that was in Aurora, respectively, for that luxury development. But what we're doing, we're bringing tenants forward to actually have their voices heard. So residents in the East Colfax community said, well, we can't afford $600,000 condos. So the question came up is, who is this being built for? and it's not the residents of East Colfax. But we also believe that it's going to take more. It's going to take really a large group of people, renters in the city. 50% of Denver are renters, sticking together to say that we need development that's actually affordable. A lot of the times when the word affordability is brought up, it's not really defined, and we are actually coming to people in the city and to developers and saying, you know, if you're going to build a unit that's affordable or a building that's affordable, it should be, you know, 0 to 30% AMI, which is the greatest need for housing in the city. We do have a housing shortage, but I think it's always talked about in the case of it's not really defined what that shortage is. Most of the shortage is for deeply affordable housing, which is 0 to 30% area and median income. And we're doing a lot of things, but I'll just say the last thing. We believe that we need to have a movement of a large amount of tenants that can bring their voices forward. And we believe that we can't be the only ones not just saying we need affordable housing, but we need it to change at the state level. And fighting gentrification is going to take a large policy shift to build deeply affordable housing, and hopefully I'll talk more about some of that in the other questions.
Well, let's see. I am going to sing the praises of Veronica just a little bit, and just say that I think Newsed did it best in terms of preventing gentrification through home ownership and business ownership and focusing in on a particular neighborhood, the West Side community, Loma Lincoln Park specifically, which is where the project that I am here representing is being developed. Newsed, a community development corporation, and perhaps there are other CDCs in Loma Lincoln Park that are engaged in affordable housing now. I'm not real sure. I've been gone from Newsed for many years now, but as a consultant with the Native American Housing Circle, I can tell you that there are other ways, probably not as strategic as home ownership and business ownership, but still ways of preventing gentrification that we are engaged in with the development of the 901 Navajo project. And there are a couple of poster boards that are sitting here to my right of the stage that show conceptual drawings of the project, conceptual design drawings, and like Nate was saying, folks having their voice in the development process, and in this case, the design for the project is key to the process of preventing gentrification. This project is one of the very first. I wouldn't say that it's the first Native American affordable housing project in the city and county of Denver, because there is one that I'm familiar with that Leo Rodriguez and Terry Badhand and the Denver Indian Center and Lucio Echohawk were involved in many years ago when I was at Newsed, and still very, very young then, that was done with the Denver Indian Center. And this may be the second of the two projects that was done, and where there has been extensive involvement of Native American people in the design and the development of this beautiful project. The developer is Mercy Housing. The collaborating partners are the Native American Housing Circle that I'm representing here today, the Denver Indian Health and Family Services Organization, Wow Power, and again, Mercy Housing, and it's on land owned by the Denver Housing Authority. And, you know, Newsed played a critical role in leading the strategy toward preventing gentrification from happening in Loma Lincoln Park by owning and controlling land in that neighborhood. Denver Housing Authority, Mercy Housing, and our other partners that are developing this particular project, which will consist of 190 units, 94 of which will be permanent supportive housing focused on taking unhoused Native Americans off the streets and placing them into permanent supportive housing. You know, is one of those efforts where we are making sure that the project will provide the supports and the ongoing services that our people need to live well and to maintain housing that is beautiful, that includes integrated medical, mental health, and dental services, all in one facility. And it's surrounded by a community of Chicanos and Mexicanos and a cultural district that was led and continues to be led and celebrated by NewSed.
I'm going to start actually by talking a little bit too about like gentrification and tying it to racial segregation as well, right? Like I really like to hone in on the forced economic displacement of folks in particular areas, right? And what causes that, right? So you're looking both at like, and when we talk too about racial segregation, you're looking at like what resources and investments are in these particular communities and what shows up after they're displaced and why you can't afford to do that. And like similar to Nate too, right? Like we work primarily with folks in the Green Valley Ranch area, and I actually have mostly homeowners, but we're also very concerned about renters' rights as well because if you're at this conference, then you're probably of the mind that like housing ought to be a human right. And we mentioned, right, that like there's a huge public sector problem with that, right? When you talk to like urban planners or like how's that working, we'll often hear about like, well, there's not a market solution for incentivizing developers to build for like this 0 to 30 income level, right? Well, why are we depending on that still readily then, right? So we're living in a society that has consistently defunded sources of doing that, so where we have robust public places for folks to make housing like separate from like that actual human right. And so that's I think like a very large portion and often an afterthought when we're talking about policy that we're creating. And so that's, I think, a large charge to put on us, and we're barely like scratching the surface of doing that. But what we've been focusing primarily on is ensuring that homeowners and renters are not continuing to lose that equity. So we've been working primarily in the HOA Metro District sort of area to ensure that like they're not continuing to be foreclosed on. So recently we just passed 1266 HB 24 1267 that passed last week and was signed into law. In coalition with many of the groups who are here, right? And let me make sure I shout out the Colorado Homes for All Coalition, who's been working diligently for not just this year, but the last 2 years, and actually even was working on rent control before. This legislative session passed for-cause eviction, 1098, which was passed into law, and as of like that signing, that law is active. So like you can no longer just like continue to like not renew a lease for no reason. And these are like factors that are like leaving people displaced without any equity that we, I think, need to take on head on and like look at that elephant in the room of like, well, if we can't find strong leverages to incentivize like market solutions, where are we coming in as a society to make way for that? And so that's kind of like what we've been doing and I think how we're looking at that here in Denver.
Thank you. So the next question, and you know, I know you're all familiar with this and seen it happening all over the city. Investors are purchasing an increasing number of formerly owner-occupied homes and putting them up for rent, decreasing the supply of affordable homes for sale, or they tear them down and start gentrifying the neighborhood. What are possible interventions to stop this trend? And just let me share with you some of the neighborhoods I'm concerned about. Via Park is already being gentrified. Barnum isn't, and Westwood isn't. Lama Lincoln Park has somewhat been gentrified. And Globeville, Swansea, and Elyria has such a large number of homeowners that it would be hard to gentrify those three neighborhoods unless people gave up their homes. So what are the possible interventions to stop this trend?
Land trusts. I think we need more land trusts. You mentioned Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, and one organization. We at EC3, we work primarily with renters and small business at the moment, but I really look up to the work of the GES Coalition. And one thing that they do, they have is the Land Trust Collective. And I think that's primarily what you're alluding to is, they're able to fight against gentrification because there's a high amount of home ownership through that organization that they have in their community. And I think that's something that a lot of our community organizations should strive for. And that's one of the reasons why we work in coalition with them, and to push forward these other policy initiatives like the right of first refusal, which would help, I believe, in these situations.
Thank you. Yeah, and I also admire some of these communities that have been able to organize. I think that what I see in my district in particular is that hasn't happened yet. There isn't community organizing, and we have a real need for that. And I think when I look at GES, I feel like that was started partially because there was this huge expansion and project of I-70 plus the National Western Stock Show, which caused people to come together and to talk about these things, because usually we're too busy working to go to that community meeting. We have community meetings in the West Side and there's like 2 or 3 people. And so I think community organizing is a huge way to help fight gentrification, as well as owning your home. And when I think about homeowners in the west side of my district, which is the historically redlined part of my district, I think about their ability to stay in their homes because of the rising costs, because of the temptation to sell, and some of the things that I've been thinking about in supporting the homeowners in the west side is the energy efficiency upgrades to help keep their Excel bills down and other tax incentives that will provide that benefit to homeowners. The other thing that Denver has done is the rental licensing component, to where landlords in Denver now have to register so that we at least even know how many of the homes are for rent and how many are for purchase, and making sure that those people that are renters are able to have a habitable home. Because another thing that I've seen in my district is people that don't have access to water, people that don't have functioning plumbing. And so our ability to hold those landlords accountable creates that as well. So I think those are some of the things that we're working on as a city.
I think GSE is an interesting phenomenon because before I moved to the west side, we lived in Swansea, and the home ownership rate in Globeville, Swansea, and Elyria was always more than 50%. So even as a child, that has been the case, and it's the highest ownership rate among people of color in the city and county of Denver ever, and it continues to be the case. And so land trusts absolutely are a key, and so are home ownership programs and community development corporations like Northeast Denver Housing and NewSed and Del Norte and all of the others out there that are using low-income housing tax credits and other mechanisms to develop affordable housing, but to put those on the market as home ownership opportunities. I think those are critical. And also the mechanisms that the keynote speaker was talking about, where people who were unable to purchase homes prior to the Fair Housing Act, that they be given the priority and access to down payment at no interest, with no interest rates, to be able to do that. I think that there's a lot of interesting options that are out there, and that we need to continue to push to make those available.
I would probably reiterate some of my last segment too, or kind of just around. I agree too with the panel around like community land trust and ensuring that that's happening. But just also like again, like I think it's an unpopular opinion, but like if we're commodifying like housing as the main mechanism to build wealth, and that's it like has historically and continues to like leave people behind, that's going to continue to be a problem. I mean. Yeah, I would just, I would say, I'm kind of like concerned too around like particular projects that are coming up that are like built to rent as well. I think we're seeing more development that's kind of looking at like this growing median income as well. And rather than building to own, we're seeing more build to rent and kind of locking people in a larger perpetual cycle of this kind of renter thing. And like the disparities too, like we talked a little bit about getting into a home, but the disparities now between being able to afford a home and even like 10, 15 years ago have drastically like shifted, right? Like when you look at incomes versus like how much it costs to actually now like buy a new build, right? That's going to be a continued issue. I think, you know, we're looking at too, right? Still definitely a housing shortage, right? And being able to continue to build like so you're looking at like zoning, right, and having like inclusionary zoning in places where it's typically more affluent, and being able to have like, again, truly affordable housing in some of those areas as a very large solution as well. But I think like we're not addressing the kind of elephant in the room of like where's that going to come from, right?
Thank you so much. Those were great answers. And the final question, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. 20%, 1 in 5 of Coloradans have some type of disability. And the rate of disability among blacks is nearly 50% higher than those among whites. 12.9% for blacks and 8.7% for whites. What measures need to be taken to assure that our changing neighborhoods are accessible to all, regardless of physical or mental abilities?
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, our society isn't built in a way that's accommodating to different abilities or neurodiversity, right? Like, we're like, and again, like historically, we shut down mental institutions and are no longer funding that type of thing. Like the reason one of the reasons I like housing work so much is because it has so many intersections of ability, right? Like it's your state of security. We're seeing like it's where you're going to make sure, and like we also know that like if you have those housing resources, you're more likely going to be able to do other things in your life. So I think it's important, right, that we're looking at like what policies are omitted, what aren't we addressing when it comes to our health, our housing, and how that's built, and where's that solution going to come from, right?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for that. And I think that when we think about going back to redlining and gentrification is the social determinants of health. And I would like to question, why is it that our communities of color are more likely to have injuries? What are the inequities in our healthcare system? What are the inequities in our parts of our city? Where, even talking about GES, also, side note, GES is one of the most polluted areas of our city. Maybe that's why there's homeownership, because nobody else wanted to live there. So those are important things to think about. And one thing that I'm really excited about is the sidewalk bill that's going to create sidewalks across our city for accessibility, because there's areas of particularly redlined areas, of course, don't have sidewalks at all, or the sidewalks they have are completely inaccessible. A lot of the ADA ramps dump you straight into a US highway road. That's another thing that I'm looking at across my district. Why are the roads in the redlined area of my district state highways, but on the other side of my district, they're just normal city roads? That means slower speed limits, less likelihood of injury or death on those streets. So I think when we look at the infrastructure side of our neighborhoods, that's an important part of that conversation. I think we're taking some steps. And what I would like to see, particularly with the sidewalk bill, is that we're extremely intentional that we're not going to the wealthiest areas that already have decent sidewalks to replace their sidewalks, that we're intentionally going to. There's even parks in my district that don't have a sidewalk. Like, what are you supposed to go do at the park? Just sit on the grass? So when I look at all of these inequities across my district in particular, I know they're echoed throughout the city. You know, just like the GES with the highway, we have I-25, there's I-70, and along those areas, there's worse air quality, there's much more likelihood of getting injured in the first place. So I really think that, going back to what my colleague said, is it's about that intersectionality and how health is related to housing. So I think that making sure we're bringing health into the housing conversation and those inequities across our city is a way to help with that issue.
One thing that we've been doing at EC3 is we've been working with Denver Metro Fair Housing to give people fair housing resources and education. I learned recently, like over this year, that some of the complaints, the nature of most of the complaints that Denver Metro Fair Housing Center gets is on the basis of disability more than even race. So helping people file reasonable accommodation requests, and helping them find resources to actually know their rights so that they can actually file these accommodation requests. That's something like in the more immediate term, but also in the long term, like we have to ask like why in our communities is that the condition? Why is that the condition that people with disabilities aren't able to live in accessible units? And it's because there's just been so much disinvestment over decades. East Colfax was a redlined neighborhood, and it's showing to this day. So, you know, part of the work also is shifting the balance of forces between developers and tenants. They're very, very basic requests that people have to have, you know, safe, affordable living conditions, and that's part and parcel of our work.
I think my friends up here on the panel have done a really good job, especially the councilwoman, in responding to, you know, the inequities that exist out there around folks who are challenged with disabilities. So I'm gonna approach this question just focused on the project that the Native American Housing Circle is involved with at 901 Navajo. And I think for us, we wanted to hear from the Native American community on all of the aspects of what mattered to folks around health and physical and challenges. And so we made sure that the project was being developed and designed with all of those needs in mind, including space for ceremony, because spiritual expression and ceremony and access to space for ceremony was such an important need and way for expression that we wanted to make sure that we got it right. So we spent lots of time, many hours, pulling together many groups, especially elders, around responding to physical challenges, health challenges, the need for space, especially around ceremony, and the use of space and the types of gatherings that we would use and how we would access that space. And so, you know, again, I think that what we learned, and we're still not finished, there are still gatherings that are being held, and making sure that all voices who wanted to be heard are being heard. What we learned is that we need to listen, and we need to respond in a way that is representative of the voices in our community around every issue. And the physical challenges and the expression of spirituality were among the priorities with respect to this project.
Thank you, Virgie. Thank you so much. Those were great, great comments. And I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience in just a minute. But I just wanted to make a point about when Reagan closed the mental health facilities across the country back in the 80s, you saw thousands of people out on the street with nowhere to go. I had a friend in Pittsburgh who ran the Oakland Community Development Corporation who had one of those old 4 or 5 story homes that are office owned. And she said there were so many people roaming the streets where she was. And it's typical of what a community development corporation can do just besides housing. They're more of a holistic approach to developing a neighborhood. She opened up one of the floors for them so they could come in and play games or do copying, because they all had mental health problems. At least they were there and not out on the streets. And I don't think our cities ever really have gotten their arms around that closing of mental institutions and, the homelessness issue. And it's a real shame that we really need to work on this together. But I'm going to open it up for questions now, and you can come to the microphone right here. And if we have any questions from people that are on Zoom. Don't all come up at once. This is Regina Jones. She's our enforcement director at Denver Metro Fair Housing Center.
Hi. Hi, this question is from online. The concern is no one is addressed housing for people with disability and low-income barriers, as well as people with mental health disabilities.
I can speak a little bit to that. I'm speaking specifically to my district. In my district, there is the Columbine Towers is Denver Housing Authority partnership for people with disabilities, and believe it or not, this building wasn't ADA accessible. And so the city just invested the largest so far grant from the Housing Stability Department to upgrade this entire building to be ADA accessible. So I think there's some steps happening there, as well as there's another development in my district where we were able to advocate for veterans with disabilities. It's called Pasquale Gardens. So when I think about it from my city council perspective, it's that when people and developers come and they want to rezone an area, is having that conversation. These are the needs of our area. What is that affordability? It's often is defined before they proceed, and there are different levels of affordability that we put a percentage towards. I think another way that the city is leading is the Expanding Housing Affordability Act, which requires every single development to have affordability. But, I don't think that we talk about the accessibility piece in that as much. So second to that, I think that where we can really make an effect is our building code. How are we making sure that our building code is being inclusive of all those ADA accessibilities, but also retrofitting those past buildings to make sure that they have that accessibility. And there is a focus, I would say, with that being in the affordable housing arena.
The 901 Navajo project will be 100% accessible. And in terms of behavioral health services, 17,000 square feet of the building will be dedicated for integrated health, which includes medical services, physical medical services, mental health services, and dental services provided by the Denver Indian Health and Family Services Organization. Additionally, 94 of the 190 units will be dedicated as supportive housing units, and that's specifically for folks that are currently experiencing homelessness.
I wanted to add on the behavioral health piece as well. A lot of the organizations in my district do provide that, including the Warren Village Women Being Project. And my district has one of the largest micro communities for unhoused people. And the Colorado Coalition of the Homeless is bringing a therapist there every single week. I think this is a new experiment that we're working on and developing towards that extremely low income with wraparound services. What does that look like and how do we make sure it's successful is something that my office spends a lot of time on.
Another question. HUD just released the new AMI for housing. In a lot of the light-tech properties or subsidized housing, the rent is higher than their income.
I didn't catch the last part. What was that?
In the light-tech properties or subsidized housing, the rent is higher than their income. How can that be resolved?
They could make it more affordable. They could just lower the limits.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think the elephant in the room is like we're not addressing how are we controlling cost for folks, right? Like it does seem pretty simple, but there's a large hostility around like rent stabilization or controlling like cost caps for like costs for housing. But like, I mean, like, I don't know if like the growing concern around like the aging population who are becoming the largest number of homeless folks, if that's like not, you know, incentive enough, like, like when is it going to be, right? And I think I like coming from a grassroots, you know, sort of perspective, right? Like we don't provide a lot of direct services outside of education. What we're generally trying to do is like raise these concerns to folks, get folks together to create the political will so that like, I think Nate said it. I mean, like we could make it like there's like we can make laws and policies to do just that. But we haven't had the political will to do so. So I mean, like, just trying to like get folks like nothing that I've done for this organization has been on my own, right? Like it's been through coalition, it's been through community groups, and it's getting folks together like yourselves who care about this to like advocate for that and do something about it and shift the power dynamics that we have, right? And so that's what I would advocate that we're collectively endeavoring in.
But it seems to me that also is a question for CHAFA. Wouldn't that be the case that CHAFA is approving LIHTC credits to developers that have rents that perhaps are too high? Perhaps that's a question that we need to be redirecting to CHAFA?
I also read recently that the president set a limit on the amount of rent that can, a light-tech property could increase the rent in a year to 10%. 10%, who can afford a 10% rent increase in a year? Is this supposed to be like some type of accomplishment? I don't know. But in all seriousness, there's always this elephant in the room that Kevin keeps referring to, and a lot of us here said, like we need rent control. I know the governor is, probably shaking his boots at the words rent control, but we need rent control really badly. And any conversation about affordable housing and stopping gentrification without rent control is not going to be enough.
I think another thing that we're doing as a city, you know, outside of the state's area is finding ways to provide housing. There's some regulations right now that prevent the city from being a provider, but the bottom line is as long as we're only depending on developers to provide this, it's never going to happen. And I had one more point on that. Let me see if I can remember it. I lost it, but at the end of the day, I think at the city level, what we're trying to do is find ways that we can provide that service, because that extremely low service, people aren't going to make money off of it. So that's when the city has to step in, and when there's never going to be a developer that's going to provide a rent that is below what it costs them to provide the housing. And so that's when the government has to step in and do our part to make sure that we have those properties available.
Okay. It sort of begs the question, what are low-income housing tax credits for? And if they're not going to meet the needs of low-income housing people, then Jaffrey needs to rethink that, and also HUD. Next question.
There's been a lot of talk about how housing is connected with health, and I think that everyone on the panel has touched on that in some way. And recently we've seen hospitals kind of try and propose taking this on, with places like Denver Health proposing to have their own apartments for people. What are your thoughts on hospitals providing housing? Do you feel like this is a sustainable solution, or would you recommend something else?
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's not a sustainable solution. I am so grateful for Denver Health, and we absolutely need to be providing that housing. When you have someone that has lost a toe and you know they're returning to homelessness after you patch up their foot, the likelihood of them losing the rest of their toes is very high. And so I think that having them provide that emergency care outside of, yes, providing housing, but I do think the city, state, and federal government need to step up in that area.
However, I do think the reverse is sustainable. Housing organizations that make room for healthcare organizations to fit within housing organizations are viable solutions, like the 901 Navajo project.
Just before we move on, could you please fill out the evaluations that are those yellow forms? We'd really appreciate to have some evaluation around this conference. Thank you. Go ahead.
I did want to touch really quickly. I remember what I lost in my answer to the previous question, which is asking why aren't people making enough to pay rent? That's also part of the conversation. And so how do we help people? And that's not a reality for everyone. If you're disabled or you're elderly, you're not worried about making an extra $1,000 or $2,000 a month. But how are we ensuring that people are able to advance their skills and get accessibility to the job opportunities that right now aren't? I think we're not valuing lived life experiences, and we're not providing enough training opportunities that don't require a very expensive 4-year degree to do some jobs that are also worth a lot more than people are being paid right now. Sorry. No, we can go back.
Well, and what do we need to do to hold employers accountable for paying jobs that pay living wages?
Good point, Bridgie. So, one more question, and then we have to stop.
Okay. What I've heard a lot is that community organization is really what backed a lot of these changes. What can you recommend that we do to motivate or connect residents to be more involved in these community meetings?
She asked, what can we do to get involvement from the community? One of the strategies that I'm looking at for the West Side in my district is the promotora style. I think it's that cultural relevance, right? Because if you send a survey to the West Side of like 30 questions on what the neighborhood plan should look like, they're not going to be able to respond to that. What we need is real people from the community that they trust, because they also don't trust the city government, the state government, the federal government showing up to their door to ask them questions. We need to hire and pay people for their time, pay the community leaders that are already there, and have them be our ambassadors and negotiate on behalf of the community, because at the end of the day, they're not here just to feed back what the community wants, but that person has created a form of wealth that we don't value in our society right now. That is the old lady on the corner that knows who's sick, that knows when this person died and took tamales to this person yesterday and knows why that business is going out of business. We need to, as an elected official, I'm looking to identify those people, find a way to compensate those people for their wealth, and use their trust to help understand what the issues are, how we build trust, and how we can advance our communities as a whole.
I'll just say very briefly, I think, go into the community. Like, you have to start with one person. If one person knows their neighbor, maybe you live in the community that you want to organize in. That's how I started. If you talk to someone, and it all comes down to self-interest and community interest. You know, if someone is threatening, if your landlord is threatening to raise your rent $100, like, you kind of don't have a choice to organize. It's in your own interest, right? You're protecting yourself and your community. It's not for an external cause. It's not for this, that, and the other. But that's what community organizing is all about. It's standing up for you, yourself, and your neighbors and your family. So if there's something pressing in the community, go talk to your neighbors about it. That's how all organizing begins.
So I'm gonna try to tread lightly here as the national organization, but I would reiterate what Nate said, right? Like, join an organization that's in your community, and I'm sure that, like, 9 to 5, Together Colorado, EC3, like, join them. And now the self-plug, like the shameless self-plug. If you have a phone right now and you miss me at the table, you can go to the redressmovement.com and sign up. We'll send you, like, accounts. Like, come to the community meetings, get involved with that, put up together your own popular education, advocate for testimony, do a direct action, right? Our organization, as well as the ones I listed beforehand, are well equipped to do so, and like, just become a part of that, because, like, if we're not actively doing that, they're going to continue to do what they've been doing, right? The reason that we have these crises isn't out of nowhere, right? Like, there are conditions that led to that, and we also need to do something to push back against that.
Thank you so much. I know that when Virginia worked for me at NewSed and we'd have community meetings, we would have committees that people were interested in. Of course, our community was real interested in law enforcement because of, issues with the police. We had an arts and cultural committee. It has to be relevant to what's going on in your neighborhood at the time, or people don't want to come. So, whatever is relevant, what people are complaining about, it'll get them to a meeting. It got our neighborhood to the meeting, Lama Lincoln Park, and also feed them. And that'll give you, I'm serious. So thank you so much for your time, being here today, your energy. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next year.